you have in common with Winston Churchill. And I don't think Winston Churchill was ever a member of the British National Party.
He certainly wasn't. It wasn't around in those days.
Your views.
Yeah, well, Winston Churchill was a great British politician, and if he were around now and he were just to repeat what he said about the dangers of mass immigration, if he were to repeat what he said about how Britain should stay out of the European Union, if he were to repeat in particular what he said about the dangers of Islam to the West, then he would be expelled from any political party in Britain except the British National Party.
Simon.
It's very different times now to World War II. I think you had the Nazi Party building up. There was reasons back then why obviously immigration was a lot more hard. But it seems to me that you're using scare tactics by putting yourself alongside Winston Churchill and sort of suggesting to people that you're a Winston Churchill-like character that's going to help free the world from war and stop us being invaded.
Well,
and I'm actually quite insulted that to have your face next to one of the best leaders this country's ever had, and I think you're probably going to lose more votes rather than gain votes by doing that.
Well, I think that if you look at what Winston Churchill said about mass immigration, not during the war, but well after the war in his last premiership, and he warned it was going to be a disaster for Britain and it had to be stopped, he actually used the phrase, keep Britain white. I mean, the man would now be regarded as an extremist. He wasn't. He was a great politician whose legacy and the legacy of people who fought under him has been betrayed by the old parties.
Simon,
thank you. Great war leader, and I don't think anybody would doubt that. But still, I still can't see why you can compare yourself with Winston Churchill and put Winston Churchill on a British National Party leaflet. And I actually think that's really insulting to the millions of people that actually died during World War II. I'm very insulted by it. Both my grandparents, grandfathers fought in the war, and I'm sure they both be insulted by it as well.
Simon, thank you very much indeed for calling. To Reading now, and to Syed Ashrafi. You're through to Mr. Griffin.
Hi, Mr. Griffin.
Hello, Syed.
You've offered £50,000 for immigrants to go back to their countries, but I would like to remind you that there's many people living here. They don't need £50,000. They're only here because their lives were not safe back in their country. Would your £50,000 guarantee their safety?
Well, if they're here legally as genuine asylum seekers, then that money is on offer to people who want to go. Obviously, and there's plenty of safe countries, and there's places like Iraq which have now been made safe by, among others, the blood of British soldiers. So if people come from countries which are now safe, they should go back there anyway. But the money is there for people who want to take it and want to go. All I would say about asylum seekers, people here because their country isn't safe, is, well, they had or have a legal obligation under international law to stop in the first safe country that they came to. And for most people, Britain isn't the first safe country they could come to. Britain, quite simply, is soft-touch Britain, and people who come to soft-touch Britain to live at our expense should be sent back to the first safe country they passed through when they escaped.
Syed, what would you like to respond? Hello, Syed.
Mr. Griffin, and you also have said that the non-white Britons can also take £50,000 and go to the country. What about people who are non-white and born in this country and they don't have any other country? If someone offered you £50,000, would you leave Britain?
Well, what we're saying here is that money would be available, as it is now. It's present government policy, but they don't let it be known very much. They don't spend very much money on it. What we're saying is the money is there if people want to go. But as regards people, especially people who are born in this country, if whatever your race, creed and colour, if you're born in this country, if you and your family are paid into our society and are helping make this society work, and if you accept British values, then we don't even want to pay you to go home because you're doing a reasonable job here.
Syed, thank you very much. To Nottingham now, and to Sean Falston.
Would Nick Griffin be good enough to tell me whether I'm British or not, given that 3 of my grandparents were foreign-born?
It doesn't matter where on earth they come from. Obviously, I can't see you down the radio. But yes, Sean, you're British.
How do you mean
you're
you
British?
Can't see him down the radio? So it would make a difference what colour he was. Is that what you're
it would
saying?
make a difference in particular in that if he was what the BBC would call white, then I'd assume, and from his name, I'd assume he was Irish, and I'm part Irish as well, and we regard the Irish as completely part of Britain.
Why would you need to see him to know whether he was British or not?
Because if I could see him, I could tell whether his 3 ancestors were Irish or not.
Really? Sean?
Well, I was expecting that response, and I was asked by the producer where my grandparents were born, and I didn't want to say where they were from for that very reason, because I suspected that it would make a difference to Mr. Griffin what colour my skin was.
It doesn't make a difference. I'm merely talking from your name, Sean, which is an Irish name. You were asking that. So if your grandparents were Irish, then I'm simply saying that you're absolutely ethnically British.
There's 3 of my grandparents weren't ethnically British.
Right.
Would I be British?
You'd be civically British, yes, absolutely.
But not indigenous British?
No, of course not, any more than if my ancestors had gone to India and they'd lived there for centuries, and as some English people did under the Raj. When India achieved her independence, they said to those people, you might have been born in India, so might your grandparents, but you're not ethnically Indian.
Sean.
At what point would I become an indigenous Briton? Would my offspring become indigenous Britons? How many generations? And I'm presuming that Celts, Romans and Saxons are okay. At what point... how many generations does it take before you're becoming...
Well, this isn't a BNP invention or something similar. This is a matter of English and international law. And you have to go back, in fact, in English law to the time of common memory, legal memory, which is about 1208 or something like that. So quite simply, we've got people in this country, of course, some ethnic minorities from around the world who came here 2-3 generations ago, and we respect them every right and we fully accept them as British citizens. But I'm simply saying, as a matter of fact, that just as if I went to Nigeria and lived there and my children did and my grandchildren did, they would not be Nigerians. So a Nigerian who comes to Britain can be, in the end, or they and their children, can be totally civically British and part of our society, but just don't say they're English. Otherwise, you're saying, if anyone can be English, where does that leave the English identity? And this is the BBC's problem. It's a racism that the BBC has, and a lot of people listen to the BBC and take its line on. You're denying the English, especially, a right to be themselves, and that's wicked.
The royal family came from Germany, didn't they? The Hanoverian house in the 18th century. Are they indigenous?
Well... That was part of the royal family. They're a fairly old, mixed-up bunch of Europeans, but they're fully integrated. Yeah, when you reach a stage when you simply can't tell, when the whole community regards someone as being part of the indigenous, then that's when they're indigenous. That's the case in the Amazon jungle. Why is it different here?
Sean, thank you for your call. To George Macon now, who's calling from Walsall.
Hello. I'd like to ask Mr. Griffin, when did you stop being a Holocaust denier, and why did you stop being a Holocaust denier?
Well, it's a little bit like asking when have I stopped beating my wife yet? I've never questioned the fact that millions of Jews were murdered by the Nazis in one of the great crimes of a crime-filled century. There's simply no question about that. As to what I said, what I believed and why I've changed my mind, the simple truth is that while Jack Straw said you can say what you like in England, I travel as an MEP through France and Belgium, and those countries have ridiculously strict extradition laws. And if I simply said, if the BBC were to say what I believed in the past, wrongly in some cases, then I and the presenter could be taken away. But the problem here is...
I'm not sure that's completely right, but just so listeners know the truth of it, you were convicted of violating Section 19 of the Public Order Act relating to the offence of publishing or distributing racially inflammatory written material.
That's correct, under a law which says telling the truth is no defence, and the question of the Holocaust did not come into that conviction. So as far as that is concerned, you are repeating an old BBC lie.
George.
Well, Mr. Griffin says that he's never been a denier of the Holocaust at the beginning of his reply. So why did he say on the Cook Report in 1997, I accept hundreds, perhaps thousands of Jews were shot on the Eastern Front? But this nonsense about gas chambers is exposed as a total lie. That's a direct quote, Mr. Griffin.
It is, and the shocking truth, George, is that I'm not allowed to discuss that, why I said that, what I believed then, what I believe now, because otherwise I could be taken to Germany and thrown in a cell without trial for years on end. So I'm not going to talk about it. Plus, the BBC, I've just been dealing with this on Radio 2 with Jeremy Fine a few minutes ago.
I'm sorry. We're just about to run out of time, but thank you all very much indeed for your calls. That's the last of our election calls with party leaders.